Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So taking on a fun and exciting episode for you guys today because it is the end of July, so it's time to do the monthly emulation news roundup. Basically, I'm going to be going over all of the different emulation updates of the month of July across multiple different diverse emulators and projects. And we're starting it off today with the fact that Paprium has been dumped and now works in a custom version of Genesis GX Plus. And to say people wanted to play this game would be an understatement. It disappeared with over $1 million, and basically no one actually ever received their own copies outside of maybe like 30 or 40 people out there that have commented saying they actually got a cartridge for the game. But now everyone can play it, especially those who actually paid Watermelon a ton of money to get a copy and were left with absolutely nothing. And that is the fun part about emulation. It isn't just keeping old games alive, it's actually righting some wrongs in the instance of Paprium, allowing people to actually drop that cash to play the game. Because if you're not aware, Watermelon Games and Fonzie basically disappeared with $1 million of Patreon cash, promising new cartridges, and this thing ported over to basically every home console as well as Steam, and absolutely none of that has happened at this point in time. The only people that have been able to play the game have been the ones that rarely received those copies back in the day. Now the emulation isn't perfect. There is still, at least the recording of this video, a slight freezing issue in the end of one of the campaigns, and the sound is using an MP3 player versus actually using the onboard sound hardware from that Dayton Meister chip that Watermelon put on the cartridge. But honestly, anything playable is an improvement compared to where we were before, because I was one of the lucky few that actually received a copy of this game, and I was able to review it on the channel after I let you guys vote as to whether or not to open it up or keep it sealed. And now everyone can check this game out, and that is absolutely great, and why emulation is so important. And now too, it is working on some flashcards, at least as proof of concept, and that will definitely be coming soon, so it'll leave emulation and go to real hardware without actually having to own a copy of Paprium in and of itself. But this was important to basically everyone. It made me very happy to see, because everyone should be able to play this game that actually paid Watermelon money, and now via emulation and makers out there, they've made sure that has been done through reverse engineering and updating emulators. But go ahead and listen to a little bit of the soundtrack. You can hear where the music's slightly odd, and I'll be right back with a ton more emulation news. I mean, the music isn't perfect and is losing that pitch correction and overall change in tone that the actual hardware on the Paprium cart would utilize, because it is just playing back MP3s, but it's like 95% of the way there, and I'm sure it'll update and get better as time goes on. But honestly, this was a massive development in the month of July for emulation, making a game that pretty much everyone couldn't play now playable. Now moving over to the arcade side of things, in a bit of news that I made along with my Discord, Cooper's 9 is now 100% preserved and completely playable both in Teknoparrot as well as a standalone launcher, and that is absolutely awesome because this game was basically 100% lost outside of maybe like 2 arcade cabinets that pretty much anyone knew about that still existed in the world. This was a Konami game that was developed by GameWax, and it was always known to be out there, but it basically got no distribution whatsoever. So by actually hunting down the security dongle for this and working with some people, big thanks to Random Access Gamer from my Discord server for spearheading a lot of this, along with some of the Teknoparrot people and others, this game is now playable and it will play on any PC out there so long as it's Windows based. Haven't tested it on Linux yet, and this is some quasi emulation news because it is basically using a wrapper to run on a modern system, even though back in the day this would have released on a very under-spec PC, because this was the era of PC games that basically just were masquerading as arcade games because they're just computer parts in a box in a cabinet. But honestly, from emulation standpoints as well as preservation standpoints, having something like this preserved for all time and being able to be played by anyone really makes me happy, and it is important to me that people get to experience these sort of games, because obviously if you know me, every single arcade prototype or other arcade game that I have that no one else has been able to play, I'm always happy to share and dump so that absolutely everyone can enjoy it. So Cooper's 9 definitely was one of the goals on the Konami side of things. I always wanted to find this game, help make it playable, and help make sure everyone could enjoy it, and in part my Discord server did exactly that. So now the last game we're still looking for on the Konami side of things is going to be Crazy Streets Thrill Drive 4. So if you know where there is an arcade cabinet or a hard drive out there, do let me know, because I have the security dongle. We'll make sure it emulates in something like Teknoparrot or even in a standalone launcher, so long as I can actually find that drive image. But it's soundtrack sample 2 time right now because this game's absolutely insane, and I'll be right back.
Come on, baby, let's dance.
I mean, definitely a weird soundtrack, but it 100% works in the context of what the game actually is. But moving over to Nintendo and handheld territory, MelonDS also got a very big update in the month of July, right about the middle of the month. And just so you know, I close these videos out 2 days before they run, so it is July 29th right now. So anything that happens on the 30th or the morning of the 1st will have to wait until August video, because I do need to get these things made in advance. But honestly, getting a new MelonDS update is awesome. There's new rendering support in there. There's a ton of bug fixes. It just is all around a better version of MelonDS. And honestly, Nintendo DS emulation is definitely advanced over the last couple of years, to the point in time now where if I want to play a DS game, I just usually play it on my 4K OLED in my living room unless I'm traveling around, because honestly, getting some of these games on TVs like that just makes them that much more fun. Additionally, there was a ton of networking support features added and improved on this version of MelonDS, so now having 2 instances of it running on PC and being able to network them together with 2 controllers is absolutely one of the easiest things around. And of course, you can do this across a wider network as well. It doesn't need to be on the same PC. It's just how I demoed it in the overall video. But this was maybe one of the most impressive updates on MelonDS when it actually came out in July. This networking support, the multiplayer support, just being so streamlined and so incredibly easy to use. Basically, it's a 2-button click and then you are playing against somebody else, or in my instance, using the same controller to control 2 characters. But definitely check out the new update to MelonDS if you haven't yet. It's absolutely worth it. It makes things so much better than they were before. And again, there's so many fun, incredible DS games out there to play. And if you do have a DS and you think to yourself, you know, I'd love to just sit around on the couch and play this in a big screen TV format versus the handheld, this is definitely 100% going to work for you. And if you haven't updated MelonDS for a year or 2, trust me, you definitely want this new version of the game. It has that new renderer for OpenGL, it has all of the networking features, and a ton of bug fixes. They're just going to make DS emulation that much better. Now moving over to consoles and going from Nintendo to Sony, we're talking about PCSX2 because it also got a set of updates in the month of July that bring in a lot of fixes, a lot of scaling improvements, some new controllers, and overall just better PlayStation 2 emulation. And considering last month we had the news of Iris, a new PlayStation 2 emulator that's experimental in development, there is a lot of movement on the PlayStation 2 emulation front this year in 2025. But honestly, PCSX2 is such an incredible emulator, but there's definitely still some games out there that have a few bugs as far as it's concerned, and some of these were fixed up. You're going to see there's PCSX 2.2.0 and 2.4.0. It was basically almost like a combination update from a couple different feature sets and a couple different updates, but you'll see here they expect to have 2.6.0 tentatively scheduled for late 2025, so it's not just that PCSX2 got a big update in 2025 in July, but also that there's an even bigger one being worked on for the end of the year, and I can't wait to see what that is. But you get a ton of different controller types actually working in PCSX2 now that weren't really added in before. So if you have those controllers and you have a USB adapter, you're going to be able to use them PCSX2 now and have a ton of fun with that, and that's always awesome. Additionally, there's been some alpha blending improvements and some scaling improvements that are going to fix up some visual glitches in certain games and also just make certain games look better, because there are still a few games on PCSX2 that really do have graphical glitches or otherwise not rendering the graphics correctly, so that was a big deal to actually get those done. Let's move over to Ace Combat, because that was one of the examples that the PCSX team used when they were actually talking about all these improvements. Basically fixing the upscaling, because there were issues in certain games about the alignment and offset of some of the pixels. You can see here they do give you a slider bar, so you can kind of move it back and forth to see exactly what it used to look like versus what it looks like now. And I will move into game footage and a soundtrack sample in just a moment, but this was a game I remember remember trying to play this last year and I knew it didn't look correct in the scaling because it just had a very strange, almost ghosting or shadow look to it. You'll see here that gets cleaned up on that slider bar, and when we move over to the footage, it just looks absolutely correct in that upscaled format, because PCSX2 can really make PlayStation 2 games almost look like first-gen PlayStation 3 games, depending on the scaling and graphic settings you use. Let's go to a soundtrack sample as well, because the audio in PCSX2 is absolutely flawless for most games. So we're going to go ahead and listen to that, but come back as we're going to move back over to Nintendo Emulation with a little bit of Sony PlayStation 1 in the mix. The soundtrack's great. I'll be right back.
I've got his tail. He's mine. Target is bombing the city. Fox 2. Radar lock. Shack on the target. The bomb has been hit. There's our welcoming party. Well, let your escorts handle them. Bandit at 3 o'clock. Don't let them escape, or else it's game. Mobius 1 crashed.
Now let's move over to the Ares emulator, because it got another awesome update this month as well, and this is a multi-system emulator. Right now we're looking at Nintendo 64 footage, but it basically has like 3 dozen or so systems, some marked experimental, some basically buttoned up, that you can actually emulate games for, and there's definitely been some performance improvements, especially in my opinion on the Nintendo 64 side, because they notated that you should get better performance out of this version of Ares, and I basically looked at this versus the previous version and the overall system resources on the CPU side of things that were being used when I was running the new version, and I just basically had like a 5 to 7% reduction in the overall percentage of the fastest core being used on my CPU. And they also had some improvements to the experimental PlayStation 1 emulation in Ares. Now of course DuckStation is still going to be leading as far as PlayStation 1 emulators are concerned, but it's great to see that this emulator is getting those PlayStation 1 updates, and this came out on the 9th of July. And it's one of those things, a lot of people don't seem to know that Ares exists, or a lot of people don't seem to actually utilize it as far as emulation is concerned, and I can't stress enough just how incredibly good this emulator is. You're going to see there's been a ton of updates both across Windows as well as Mac. You're going to get some bug fixes, you're going to get some freezing solutions, and you're also going to get those core threading improvements made, and that's where you're going to really get the overall better performance, because a lot of Ares emulation, especially on the Nintendo 64 side of things, can be pretty CPU intensive. So if you have a very old CPU, you might not actually be able to get the proper frame rate out of this emulator. Now I'm on an i9 12900K water cooled, and it basically runs absolutely flawlessly, but even I'm seeing better performance only in the amount of system resources it's using. And because this is, in my opinion, at least the de facto best Nintendo 64 emulator out there, it is a situation in which you absolutely want to upgrade if you're using Ares and you haven't updated in some months or even a few years, because trust me, every time you see an update come out, you should just basically download it or make sure the application updates itself, because you're going to get a ton of new fixes. You're going to get a lot of stuff on the Game Boy Advance CPU side of things, just basically implementing some undocumented instructions and different encodings, as well as just making it run better. And that kind of really is the crux of the overall update for Ares in the month of July. Things that worked well are going to work even better. There's been some bug fixes, and if you kind of had marginal performance on some of the emulators inside of Ares, you might actually end up getting full speed now. But again, this is not the type of emulator, especially on the Nintendo 64 side of things, that you're going to be able to bring a potato to and expect proper performance. You don't need an absolute rig of a gaming system, but you do need something relatively modern. But honestly, so many different emulators in Ares have been improved that it's absolutely one of my favorite multi-emulators out there. If you've never downloaded and checked it out, I can't recommend it enough. Now let's move over to the Sega side of things with Sega Saturn, and this is the Ymir or Ymir emulator. I've heard it pronounced both ways, so I always say it 2 ways. This is a work in progress, still very early Sega Saturn emulator that's brand new to the market, but even though it is early, the performance and improvements it's seen in the month of July are absolutely staggering. The developer of this is basically speedrunning the concept of developing a Sega Saturn emulator that you can use today. Now my de facto emulator for the most part is going to be MelonDS for Sega Saturn with the graphical user interface installed, but I know a lot of people are kind of hoping that this turns into the DuckStation of Sega Saturn emulation. Now I'm not sure how many overall graphical enhancements will come to this emulator at the end, but there's already been some improvements on dithering versus real transparency, so hopefully soon maybe we might see something like internal rendering resolution upscaling, because I know that is something very popular in PCSX2 and DuckStation, and people would love to see that come over to Sega Saturn. No promises whatsoever, I don't know anything you don't know, but I'm kind of assuming that that might be where this goes. But if we move over to another game, Groove on Fight, this is a game that I like to demo and talk about because latency in controls or the lack thereof. Fighting games and bullet hell shmups absolutely need responsive controls because a game like this has an input window, and if you don't get your inputs in the window timing, you're not going to be able to pull off some of the bigger moves in the game. And if there's too much latency in the emulation, that's when you're going to actually feel like the game really isn't playing the way you remember it. The good thing is, without scientifically measuring the latency, and I'm not going to do that until this actually gets much further in development, everything feels great here, everything looks great, and particularly everything sounds great, so you know that's going to be the segue to the soundtrack sample in just a moment. But Ymir is basically just getting so good every single update. There are nightly builds when they are available, and if you haven't checked this one out before, definitely do. But here's that soundtrack sample because it sounds great, and I'll be right back. Just an absolutely classic soundtrack, and now moving over to an emulation update that's also technically a real hardware update that's also technically a Mr. FPGA and FPGA core update, something that I can tell you about but can't quote-unquote show you. Super Nintendo has gotten Rumble support in many games this month, and now some emulators also incorporated the Rumble code in that came from limited run games. The developer of Star Fox Shindu Edition sent me over a demo of their new game, basically Star Fox with Rumble, obviously being the original game, just with a lot more shake. And I did a video on this, and it's now out for everyone, so expect to see a lot more Rumble coming to a lot more Super Nintendo games in the future. And the best part is it isn't just a real hardware FPGA thing, it is going to work on emulation. So if you plug in a controller that has Rumble support and you basically download one of these games that provides Rumble within the code, these new games or demos, you're going to be able to actually feel the controller rumble along with the game. And when I say it's absolutely a mind trip to actually feel a game like Super Nintendo rumble in your hand, it is totally true. Star Fox with Rumble support is just absolutely wild. Now, I use the prototype limited run games Rumble controller for Super Nintendo for this, but I know a lot of other people have tried other controllers and had success as well via emulation. So it is just going to be a fun new frontier as far as Super Nintendo games are concerned in emulation, when modders and ROM hackers go out and actually start adding Rumble to these existing games. Imagine something like Super Mario World, but every single time you stomp on a Goomba, your controller shakes a little bit. It is a small change, but it honestly is a massive change at the same time because it completely changes how the game feels in your hand. That's absolutely awesome. But we have one more update on the Super Nintendo emulation side of things, but it isn't rumbling this time. It is networking support because there was a network test for Super Nintendo Online emulation, and I did a video for that as well. And if you want to know more, I will leave those videos links in the description below if I remember. You'll see here I did update the screen, make it a little wider to get rid of that ping information at the bottom, but this is being played online against opponents in other places, and that's absolutely awesome. And even though you could do stuff like this in Fightcade, this new implementation just seems to work better and have a little bit less latency. Every once in a while you will see a hang basically when it's trying to resync itself, but otherwise it is absolutely outstanding. It is wild to see what people are doing with emulation out there these days, because Super Nintendo Online in 2025 being this easy, absolutely something that is awesome to see. And it's definitely something that will improve over time, because again, this was a network test and it is over this point in time, but it is going to be something that you're going to be able to participate in again in the future. And just think of all the incredible two-player Super Nintendo games out there that would be fun to play online. You'll see there another hitch, but that's just again the resync. This is always going to be network to network dependent, just like modern games. If you have somebody with a good ping rate and you have a good ping rate, you'll see less of that. If the ping rate goes too high, of course you're going to see more of it, but that's the standard for network play, even today on Steam or even on consoles. But basically, this is just going to open up the Super Nintendo to so many fun multiplayer experiences, and honestly, I really can't wait to see that. But you leave me a comment down below and you tell me, what games do you love to see actually go multiplayer? I would be curious, because there's so many amazing candidates out there for things that you'd want to play with a friend. And honestly, this is big as well, because in my real life, I really don't have any friends that play these type of retro games. So if I actually want to get a couple matches in, I'm going online, because if I invite somebody over, these aren't the games they're going to be playing. It's just kind of hard to get them into it, because a lot of times the friends that we have that love retro games might actually be friends that live in our city. It might be people we know online, but something like Mario Kart network support on a Super Nintendo emulator is just a straight up 10 out of 10 awesome time. But that is the news for emulation in the month of July. It's been a big month, and so far it seems like you guys enjoy these monthly news recaps, so tell me down below and tell me what your favorite development in the emulation scene was this month. I'm guessing most people are going to say the fact that Paprium emulates now. But we're done. We'll see you guys next month for the exact same video with new content. Bye bye.